90 hours, that's all it took for Indian defenses to cripple key Pakistani military infrastructure and seize the strategic initiative. In May of 2025, Operation Sindoor jolted the Indian subcontinent. Indian missiles pierced more than 300 kilometers into Pakistani territory. Brahmos, S-400, and Akash dominated the headlines. But when the markets opened the next morning, something rather unusual happened. They stayed calm. No crash, no spikes, just a normal trading day. The Nifty India Defense Index rose by more than 25% by the end of May. The key Indian defense stocks rose by more than 55% in less than a month. War is horrific for humans. There's no sugarcoating that. But economy doesn't always behave the way we would expect them during a conflict. Spending shifts, industries realign, and some sectors boom while others freeze. And this is economics of war. Hello and welcome to another episode of Economically Speaking Season 3, the official podcast of the Economics Association Sri Venkateswara College. I am Akshat, and to talk about economics of war, I have with me today a very special guest, Dr. Abhishek Malhotra. So Dr. Malhotra currently serves as an assistant professor of economics at Sri Venkateswara College, University of Delhi. He specializes in public finance and infrastructure. In past, he has served as a consultant in the Office of Chief Economic Advisor, Ministry of Finance. He has also served as the Secretary for Y20 India during the G20 Summit in 2023 and has also served as a research associate at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Thank you so much for joining us. So, sir, starting with a popular myth that a lot of us have with regards to war. War in general is horrific for the economy. But history also gives us a contrary evidence. If we look at World War II, it helped US to get out of the Great Depression. So why does war act as a rocket fuel for certain economies while crippling others?
As you've correctly pointed out, if you look at wars in human terms, there is no doubt that they are destructive. But when we talk about it from the economic point of view, given the example that you said about the Great Depression and the World War II, so at that point, if you look at the US economy was shattered with the Great Depression, and they wanted some kind of a fiscal stimulus. And that is when World War II happens. Now, whether it is related or not, whether US did it for that, for saving its economy or not, that is something that is debatable. But if you look at the point, as Keynes also pointed out, that a government spending multiplier on steroids, that is what it calls the wars. Okay, so what happens is that if you want to suddenly increase your expenditure, that is what Keynes said, right? If you have to bring your economy out of a recession, you need to increase government spending. But if you suddenly start increasing your government spending, there are going to be a lot of political hurdles. You'll have to debate in the parliament, a lot of procedure happen. But now imagine if there is a war. In that case, when you increase your expenditure, there are no questions asked. There are no political debates that happen. There are no bureaucratic hurdles that happen. Everything happens quickly. So you get war acts as a means wherein you can increase your fiscal expenditure. You can expand your fiscal budget without any questions being asked. So, so that is one relation that people draw when talking about, especially in terms of US, about wars happening and their economic recovery, because there are a lot of examples that you will find. We've spoken about the World War II after Great Depression, but then you will also find after 2000, 2001, the bubble that burst in US economy was in session. That is when in 2001, US enters Afghanistan and starts an operation. And if you look at it very recently, after COVID, when the US economy was struggling against, you see a Russia-Ukraine war happening. Now, whether again it is instigated by US or not, that is debatable. But if you try to look at history, you will find a lot of evidences wherein you will see that whenever there is a recession, whenever there is a slowdown that happens, especially in the US economy, you will find some or the other war happening in some part of the world. And why I'm saying US, it is because US benefits the most out of it. As you said, some economies are benefited, some people, that is true. Some economies, when we say some economies, I think it is US that benefits the most out of it. And the reason being that it has the largest defense manufacturing sector. So whenever, even if you look at Russia-Ukraine war, the majority of the orders that went were to the US companies. If there is a war, say in Afghanistan, when there was Gulf War, the orders went to US. So US, because it has the biggest defense industry, the orders go to the US companies, and that is how US benefits out of it. That is one. Second is US controls the finance, right? So whenever there is uncertainty in the markets, US dollar somehow becomes a safe haven for countries. People have to invest, they think US dollar is comparatively safer, so whichever currencies they think might be affected, people pull their money out and it goes to US dollars. So US benefits out of it. Again, if you look at wars, there is something that will always affect energy and oil, right? Again, the trade happens in US dollars. So when the prices go up, US again gains out of it. So there are a lot of facets attached to it. So US, there is no doubt, benefits whenever there is a war in any part of the world. So if we are saying that if we talk about economics of war and some countries benefiting out of it, there is always, if we look at economic point of view, wars do help some countries.
Okay, sir. So you talked about Russia-Ukraine war. We are in 2025 and that war is in its fourth year. So if I were to ask you in very brief, how has that war impacted the world economy?
Okay, so as I said, even if it was a fight between war between Russia and Ukraine, only two countries were involved. But if you see that, given the globalization that we have, all countries, the entire trade is interconnected. So if two countries are affected, it affects the entire world economy. Starting from when the war happened, the first sector that was impacted was energy sector, and that directly impacted all the European countries because they were the biggest buyers of energy from Russia. So they had to overnight look at their supply chains for energy and look for alternative sources. So the demand, where did the demand go again? It went to US and to Australia and to Qatar. So there were some countries that benefited out of it. Again, if you look at it, leaving the energy, but and Russia also found an alternative source of supply, right? They started supplying it to Asia, Asian countries. India is buying it, China is buying it. They found their own mechanism to work on it. So even if there is a war, it will affect not just the economies of different countries, but it also transforms the supply chains. This was just one example of energy. If you look at, say, the food supply chain, now Russia and Ukraine together supplied almost 30% of food grains to the world. They were supplying 30% of the exports, 30% of the total world exports of food grains. Now, when this stopped, again we had to look for alternatives, and every country made their own arrangement accordingly. India, if you talk about India, we were buying a lot of majority of our edible oils were coming from Ukraine. That is why when the war started, there was inflation because of edible oils price shooting up. Then the government started its own. We had subsidies that were given to produce edible oil, and we started working on our own supply chain for that, right? Similarly, if you look at the defense sector, now the Europe for many years was under investing in the defense sector because it had comparatively safer boundaries. They have no wars to fight as such. But suddenly after this war, you will see that their defense budget shoots up to 2% of the GDP. So whether which country is fighting the war is one thing, but many countries, and I would say many economies and the global economy as a whole, is always affected by war.
Okay, sir. You talked about the defense sector. So today, defense manufacturing is one of the most strategical, the important sectors of the economy, and we are seeing emergence of new players in that sector as well, especially the developing countries. So, from a public finance perspective, is building a serious defense sector beneficial for a developing country like India or any other developing country in Japan?
See, I think investing in the defense sector is always beneficial because first is it will obviously help your country grow in terms of military power, and secondly, if you see, defense is an industry that has a very big supply chain and it has a huge multiplier effect. The If you have to boost defense, you will have the sector, many related sectors will grow, including whether it be steel, metals, chemicals, and you can count tens of sectors that are included, and it has a very big multiplier effect. And that is why it is always, I would say, beneficial if a country, even a country like India, we are anyways investing a lot in defense. We've we have different reasons why we invest in defense sector, obviously. But for any developing country, I think if it invests in its defense sector, that will always help in growing the country.
So, sir, if we were to talk about Indian defense sector, we can't ignore the Brahmos story. So recently, India signed a $375 million worth of deal for Brahmos missile with Philippines, and now many countries are lining up to get that missile as well. So economically and geopolitically, how big this thing is for India?
Now, as you correctly pointed out, the success of Brahmos is not just a success of our defense sector, but it is actually it places India in the top technological hub. One of the best countries with the best technology. Uh, Talking about Brahmos specifically, as you correctly pointed out, we've signed deal with Philippines and many other Southeast Asian countries are in line. Uh, why these countries are looking at India is because India provides them with more reliable and cost efficient equipments. Now, and it comes with no geopolitical strings attached. If you look at their contracts with US or China, they are usually they try to dominate. US and China try to dominate the people who are buying from them, the countries that are buying from them. They'll have certain clauses that will more or less put the other country in a tight spot, right? But when it comes to India, we've never tried to dominate our partners. We've always looked at other countries as a partnership. And as you spoke about the geopolitical and the economic effect of it, I think geopolitical I've already covered. And if you talk about the economic point of it, I'll just give an example that if you export one Akash missile, it will give you as much gain as you would get by exporting 50,000 tons of food grain. So that is the economic impact of this. So when we are in a position that we today the countries are believing because of our successful I won't say a test, but given that the world has seen that the missiles that India has produced indigenously, it has been successful. I think if we are in a position wherein we can expand our defense technology exports, we should definitely work on it because it will not only help us geopolitically, but also economically.
Sir, while there have been a remarkable progress with regards to Indian exports, but they are still pale when you compare them with smaller countries like Israel or even Sweden. So what are the structural hurdles that have kept our exports so low even after so many years?
So there are many reasons behind our defense exports lagging behind, and I think one of the major reasons behind this is the excessive reliance on PSUs when it comes to our defense sector. We have only recently opened up FDIs in the defense sector. Our private sector has very recently started getting involved in the defense sector. So when we were relying solely on the PSUs, our innovation was almost non-existent, right? We were trying to do is trying to just cope up with what the world was doing. There was no innovation from our side. And then second, I think the major challenge that exists today is when it comes to procurement, we go for L1 bidding. L1 is when you go for a tender. So many companies will apply. Everyone will give a quote that I will supply this for this price. So the one who gives it as the at the least price, that is your L1 quote. So now when you are giving the bid to this person who is quoting you the least price, how is it leaving the scope for innovation? Because if private firms are to innovate, how do you expect them to supply at the least price, right? So when you go for L1 quotation in case of defense sector, that is again, I believe, in some or the other way, killing innovation. That is point number two. The third point being about export licensing. Now, if we have to export our defense equipments, licensing is something that is very important, especially for the private sector as well. You gave the example of Israel being far ahead than India. Now, if you have to get an export license in Israel, you will get it within a couple of weeks. But if you have to get an export license in India, it will take months or it can even take years. So that is again one policy bottleneck that affects our defense exports. Fourth, I would say it is about policy flips. Uh, there is no consistency in our policies. Uh, we have two big national parties, right? Whether BJP and Congress. Now, if you look at both of them have very different views when it comes to defense sector. But if you look at the time before 2014, even though we had a UPA regime for say 10 years, but it was a coalition government. Now, in such space, there is again no consistency because you don't know which partner would react in what way. So we've always been in a space wherein there are a lot of consistency when it comes to the political view towards defense. So that is why, because we are having a consistent view from last 10, 12 years, we've seen a significant progress in this sector. And lastly, one more thing that I believe that affects our uh, defense sector, or probably that affects private sector more, because if we have to increase our if we have to strengthen our defense sector, I believe private players have to be strengthened for that. If you see the drones that are coming in now, majority of the drones are coming from our private players, right? Now, all if you want them to actually succeed and be major exporters in the world as well, you'll need some kind of consistency, and you will have to make sure that you support them. There are examples wherein suppose sometimes there are tenders that would for example tell you that we need an equipment that can work in say minus 30 or 40 degrees, and that should weigh lesser than a laptop, and then it should not even cost more than 50,000. Now, if you give requirements like that, how do you expect a private sector to actually operate, right? And then even when you have given a contract, there are examples wherein when the supplier has covered 50%, it is ready with 50% of the produce, there will be change in the contract. So these are some issues that I think are affecting our defense sector, and if we can take care of these hurdles and remove the policy bottlenecks, I think our defense sector will be competitive in the.
So, sir, now moving on to the last question. Our defense budget have now crossed 6.5 lakh crores and is the largest component of union budget. So, how would you respond to those people who say why military and why not welfare?
See, if you look at it, I think I do understand people do talk about welfare and our allocations uh, being heavily inclined towards defense. But I believe when we are talking about welfare, defense is a part of welfare. See, when it comes to a union budget, I think defense spending should not be looked in contrast or in opposition to welfare, because national security is, I believe, a precondition for development. If we look at economic stability per se, if you want capital investments, you want people to set up factories in your country, tell me which investor would put in money if our country is not secure, right? So for economic stability, security comes first. Second, if you look at our geography, we have two nuclear armed neighbors and we have border disputes with both of them, right? So we anyways would have to invest heavily on defense. We cannot free ride like Europe, which has a lot of alliances and has neighbors that are very friendly, I would say, right? Thirdly, as I had earlier also spoken about defense spending multiplier. Now, because many sectors are directly or indirectly involved with the defense sector, we spoke about metals, chemicals, and all of that, and there are many MSMEs that are involved in the process of providing raw material, right? So it is helping the MSMEs, it is helping the workers working in the factory, and then there are requirements of software, because it is a time of cyber warfare as well. So you need softwares, you need high skilled people as well. So when you are putting in money in the defense sector, it is not going into the hands of the army directly, right? The it is multiplied and it goes to the civilians in some or the other way. That I would say is the third point. And in the end, I think a strong defense sector, the way, as I also, one example I forgot to mention is about the Agni missile. I had told you about the amount of finances it can raise for us. right? If we are able to export defense equipments to other country. So I believe a strong defense sector, if we are investing heavily in the defense sector, it is not that the money is being wasted. It is something, I believe, in today's environment, I would say it is some kind of an insurance, and it is an asset that we are producing for the future. So I don't see that the rising defense expenditure is against welfare, but I think it is for welfare.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really an insightful and fun podcast. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll soon come up with newer episodes. Thank you.